The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room as Le Petit Jardin approached its final hour of service. Saturday night, 10:47 p.m., the kind of late evening when exhaustion meets desperation, and even the most seasoned restaurant staff feel their composure fraying at the edges. Most tables had cleared out, leaving behind the remnants of expensive meals and whispered conversations. But Table 7 remained occupied, and everyone in the restaurant knew exactly who sat there. Jonathan Whitmore commanded attention without effort. The city's most feared food critic, his reviews could elevate unknown chefs to stardom or destroy decades of culinary dreams with a single brutal paragraph. Tonight, his silver hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit immaculate despite the late hour, and his notebook lay open beside his untouched dessert, a bad sign that every server recognized. "This soufflé is a disaster," Jonathan announced, his voice carrying across the nearly empty dining room. "It's dense, flavorless, and frankly insulting to anyone who understands French pastry." Sarah Martinez felt her stomach clench as she approached Table 7. At 35, she had been waiting tables for 12 years, but tonight she was covering for 2 sick coworkers while dealing with her own mounting personal crisis. Her feet ached in shoes that needed replacing months ago, and her smile felt like a mask that might crack at any moment. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "Would you like me to speak with the pastry chef? Perhaps we could offer you something else from our dessert menu?" Jonathan barely glanced up from his notes. "What I'd like is competence, which seems to be in short supply tonight. This entire meal has been a study in mediocrity masquerading as fine dining." The remaining diners at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to listen while others leaned in with the morbid fascination of witnessing a professional execution. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the offending dessert. "Of course, sir. Let me remove this immediately, Anne." "Leave it," Jonathan cut her off sharply. "I need to document this disaster properly. Although I suppose the server's inability to anticipate a guest's needs is just another symptom of this establishment's decline." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been anticipating his needs all evening, refilling his water glass before it emptied, timing the courses perfectly, ensuring his wine stayed at the optimal temperature. But none of that seemed to matter now. "I understand your disappointment," she managed, her professional training warring with growing frustration. "If there's anything I can do to improve your experience." "Your experience?" Jonathan laughed coldly. "My dear girl, you clearly don't understand what constitutes an experience worth having. Perhaps that's why you're still serving tables instead of pursuing a career that actually requires intelligence." The dining room fell silent except for the soft clink of glasses and the distant clatter from the kitchen. Sarah felt every eye in the restaurant fixed on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such a public humiliation. Sarah retreated to the service station, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the polished counter. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the composure that had carried her through countless difficult shifts. But tonight felt different, more personal, more loaded with consequences she couldn't control. Her day had begun with her 8-year-old daughter Maya crying about being teased at school for wearing second-hand clothes. Then came the call from her landlord about next month's rent increase, followed by the rejection letter from the community college where she'd applied to study nursing. Life outside these walls felt like a series of closed doors, and now, at her place of work, she faced another form of judgment. Jonathan Whitmore existed in a different universe entirely. His reviews appeared in the city's most prestigious publication, his opinions shaped the dining landscape, and his approval could transform struggling restaurants into destinations. He had never worried about rent money or worn shoes with holes in them or explained to a child why dreams sometimes had to wait. But tonight, Jonathan's usual sardonic wit had curdled into something meaner. His latest book had received lukewarm reviews, his television show had been cancelled, and rumors swirled about his contract renewal. For a man who had built his identity on having the last word, the recent criticism felt like a personal attack on his very existence. As Sarah returned to the dining room, trying to focus on closing duties, she noticed Jonathan waving her over with the imperious gesture of someone who had never been ignored. She approached his table with practiced caution, assembling her professional mask once more. "This wine," he said, holding up a glass of the restaurant's most expensive Bordeaux, "has been improperly stored. It's oxidized, flat, completely ruined. Are you people completely incompetent, or is this some sort of elaborate joke?" Sarah examined the wine glass, noting that it appeared untouched since she'd poured it 30 minutes earlier. "I'm sorry you're not satisfied with the wine, Mr. Whitmore. I'd be happy to have our sommelier." "Your sommelier?" Jonathan's voice dripped with disdain. "The 20-something kid who probably learned everything he knows from YouTube videos? Save me the performance." What I need is basic competence, which seems to be beyond the capabilities of everyone in this establishment." The handful of remaining diners watched the exchange with growing discomfort. Some began signaling for their checks, eager to escape the toxic atmosphere that had descended over the once elegant dining room. "Perhaps," Jonathan continued, his voice rising slightly, "if the staff here spent less time going through the motions and more time actually understanding hospitality, this place might deserve its reputation. As it stands, I'm beginning to understand why so many restaurants fail in this city." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. After 12 years in the service industry, she understood hospitality better than most people understood their own professions. She had comforted homesick travelers, celebrated anniversaries with elderly couples, and made countless meals memorable through attention and care. "Is there anything specific I can do to address your concerns?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the dangerous edge creeping in. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying her with cold amusement. "You could start by acknowledging that you're out of your depth. This isn't some chain restaurant where mediocrity is acceptable. People come here expecting excellence, and instead they get this." He gestured dismissively at the table, the restaurant, and by extension, at Sarah herself. "Maybe you should consider whether you're really suited for this level of service," he added with calculated cruelty. "Some people simply don't have what it takes to excel in demanding environments." The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and impossible to escape. Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, a tectonic movement of anger and dignity that had been building for hours, days, maybe years. This wasn't just about wine or soufflés or customer service. This was about a man who had appointed himself judge and jury of other people's efforts, who wielded his platform like a weapon, who had forgotten that behind every service failure was a human being doing their best with limited resources. "Mr. Whitmore," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge, "I've been in this industry for 12 years. I've served everyone from celebrating families to nervous first dates to business dinners worth millions of dollars. I know hospitality." Jonathan looked up from his notebook, one eyebrow raised in surprise at her tone. "What I don't understand," Sarah continued, "is how someone who claims to appreciate excellence can be so lacking in basic human decency." The remaining diners froze, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to fade as every person in the restaurant sensed that something significant was unfolding. Jonathan set down his pen with deliberate precision. "Excuse me?" "You heard me correctly," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You've spent the entire evening treating me and my colleagues like we're beneath your notice. You've insulted our competence, our intelligence, and our worth as professionals. And for what? Because a soufflé didn't meet your expectations? Because wine tasted different than you preferred?" "Young lady," Jonathan began, his voice taking on a warning tone, "I think you've forgotten." "No," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "I think you've forgotten. You've forgotten that every person in this restaurant is working hard to create something beautiful. The chef has been here since 6 this morning preparing your meal. The sommelier spent years studying wine to make perfect pairings. And I've been on my feet for 10 hours trying to make your evening memorable for all the right reasons." Jonathan's face had gone pale, then flushed with indignation. "How dare you? How dare I what?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, attracting the attention of the kitchen staff who had begun peering through the service window. "How dare I remind you that we're human beings deserving of basic respect? How dare I suggest that your job as a critic should elevate the industry rather than tear it down?" The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the background music seemed to have stopped, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Jonathan stood up slowly, his height advantage meant to intimidate. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I can destroy this restaurant with a single review. I can make sure you never work in the city again." Sarah felt her heart pounding, but something inside her had awakened, a sense of dignity that refused to be cowed. "Is that supposed to scare me, Mr. Whitmore? The threat that you'll use your platform to punish people who dare to call out your behavior? Because if that's the kind of critic you are, then maybe this industry would be better off without your influence." The gasp from a nearby table was audible. Jonathan's mouth opened and closed like a fish, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. "You're making a very serious mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The only mistake I'm making," Sarah replied, "is waiting 12 years to say what needed to be said. You've built a career on tearing others down, on finding fault instead of celebrating excellence, on forgetting that every meal represents someone's passion and hard work." She gestured toward the kitchen, where several staff members now stood in the doorway, watching the confrontation unfold. "These people pour their hearts into every dish. They work doubles when they're sick, miss their children's bedtime stories, sacrifice their personal lives to create something beautiful for strangers. And you reduce all of that effort to clever insults and devastating one-liners. Jonathan's face had gone through several color changes, settling on a deep red that suggested either rage or embarrassment. You have no idea what you're talking about. I've dedicated my career to maintaining standards, to pushing restaurants toward excellence. Have you? Sarah challenged. When was the last time you wrote a review that actually helped a restaurant improve? When did you last use your influence to highlight someone doing something special rather than destroying someone having an off night? For a moment, Jonathan stood frozen, his mouth open but no words coming out. The question seemed to hit him with unexpected force, and Sarah watched as something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. The other diners waited in tense silence, some reaching for their phones to capture what felt like a historic moment in the city's culinary scene. The staff members in the kitchen doorway leaned forward, hardly believing what they were witnessing. Jonathan slowly sat back down, his movements uncharacteristically uncertain. He picked up his wine glass, the one he had declared ruined, and took a slow, thoughtful sip. Then another. This wine, he said quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier venom, is actually quite good. Sarah blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. I'm sorry? Jonathan set the glass down carefully, as if it were made of the most delicate crystal. The wine. It's not oxidized. It's not ruined. It's actually exceptional. Complex, well-balanced, perfectly suited to the meal. He looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I lied. The admission fell into the silent restaurant like a stone into still water, creating ripples of confusion and disbelief. You lied? Sarah repeated. Jonathan nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass. The wine is excellent. The soufflé, while not perfect, was actually quite good, light, flavorful, well executed. The entire meal has been impressive. He looked around the restaurant, taking in the shocked faces of diners and staff. I've been having what you might call a difficult period. My book was criticized, my show was cancelled, and I've been feeling rather defensive. Sometimes, when we're hurting, we hurt others. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was not the response she had expected or prepared for. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook. May I ask your name? Sarah, she replied cautiously. Sarah Martinez. Sarah Martinez, he repeated, as if testing how the name sounded. How long did you say you've been in this industry? 12 years. Jonathan began writing in his checkbook, his pen scratching softly against the paper. And you mentioned studying nursing? Sarah's eyes widened. She hadn't realized he'd been listening so closely to her earlier comments to other staff members. Yes. I applied to a program, but I was rejected. The tuition is also challenging. Jonathan tore out a check and held it toward her. This is for $10,000. It's not charity, it's payment for the most valuable lesson I've received in years. Sarah stared at the check, afraid to touch it. Mr. Whitmore, I can't accept. Yes, you can, he interrupted gently. And you should. Because what you did tonight, standing up to me, forcing me to confront my own behavior, that took more courage than anything I've done in years. He stood up again, but this time his posture was different, less intimidating, more human. I've spent so many years thinking that my job was to find fault, to maintain standards through criticism and judgment. But you're right, when did I last help someone? When did I last use my platform to build something up rather than tear it down? Jonathan turned to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying clearly through the silent dining room. Ladies and gentlemen, I owe everyone here an apology. My behavior tonight has been inexcusable, and I want you to know that Le Petit Jardin is actually an exceptional restaurant. The food is outstanding, the service is exemplary, and the staff clearly cares deeply about your experience. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. I'm posting a review right now, not my usual formal review, but an immediate correction of my behavior. This restaurant deserves recognition, not criticism. Sarah watched in amazement as Jonathan's fingers moved across his phone screen. Around the restaurant, other diners began whispering among themselves, some smiling for the first time all evening. But more than that, Jonathan continued, looking directly at Sarah, I want to do something meaningful with the platform I've been given. I'm establishing a scholarship fund for service industry workers who want to pursue other careers. Sarah Martinez will be the first recipient, but she won't be the last. The announcement sent a wave of murmurs through the restaurant. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. The check in her hand represented more than tuition money, it represented possibility, hope, a future she had almost given up imagining. Mr. Whitmore, she began, her voice thick with emotion, I don't know what to say. Say you'll use this opportunity to become the nurse you want to be, he replied. Say you'll remember that sometimes our worst moments can become catalysts for our best decisions. Jonathan began gathering his things, but he wasn't finished speaking. I want everyone here to understand something important. What happened tonight wasn't really about wine or soufflés or service standards. It was about remembering our humanity, about treating each other with dignity regardless of our positions or circumstances. He looked around the room, making eye contact with diners and staff alike. How many times have we used our authority, whether it's professional status, wealth, or just being the customer, to make someone else feel small? How many times have we forgotten that the person serving us, teaching us, helping us, is a complete human being with dreams and struggles and worth? A woman at table 3 began applauding softly. Soon others joined in, creating a gentle wave of appreciation that filled the elegant dining room. Jonathan held up his hand for quiet. I've built a career on having the last word, on being the expert who judges others. But tonight, Sarah taught me something I should have learned long ago. True expertise isn't about finding fault, it's about recognizing excellence, nurturing potential, and lifting others up. He turned back to Sarah, extending his hand. Thank you for having the courage to call me out. Thank you for reminding me who I want to be rather than who I've become. Sarah shook his hand, still processing the surreal turn of events. Mr. Whitmore, I hope you know that I wasn't trying to. You were trying to maintain your dignity, he interrupted gently. You were defending yourself and your colleagues against behavior that was unacceptable. That's not just admirable, it's essential. Jonathan gathered his coat and briefcase, but paused at the edge of table 7. I'll be back next week, he said to Sarah. Not as a critic looking for problems, but as a customer hoping to support a restaurant that clearly cares about excellence. And I'll be bringing friends, lots of them. As he prepared to leave, Jonathan addressed the restaurant one final time. Le Petit Jardin is everything a fine dining establishment should be. The food is exceptional, the service is outstanding, and the staff clearly takes pride in creating memorable experiences. But more than that, it's a place where people still stand up for what's right, where dignity and respect matter more than hierarchy and status. He left a generous cash tip on the table, far more than the cost of his meal, and headed toward the exit. But before leaving, he turned back to Sarah one last time. The scholarship fund will be announced officially next week, but I want you to know that you've inspired something bigger than just your own opportunity. You've reminded me that criticism should build people up, not tear them down. That's a lesson worth more than any meal I've ever eaten. As the restaurant door closed behind Jonathan Whitmore, the dining room seemed to exhale collectively. The remaining customers began talking excitedly among themselves, their conversations filled with amazement at what they had witnessed. Several approached Sarah to congratulate her, expressing admiration for her courage and grace under pressure. The kitchen staff emerged fully now, clustering around Sarah with expressions of pride and disbelief. Chef Martin, a temperamental perfectionist who rarely showed emotion, wrapped her in an unexpected hug. In 30 years of cooking, he said, his voice gruff with feeling, I've never seen anyone stand up to a critic like that. You didn't just defend yourself, you defended all of us. Maria, the young sommelier Jonathan had dismissed so casually, wiped tears from her eyes. I was ready to quit after tonight, she admitted. I thought maybe I really didn't know enough, wasn't good enough. But seeing you fight for our dignity, it reminded me why I love this work. Sarah looked down at the check still clutched in her hand, the number seeming surreal in the soft light of the chandelier. $10,000. Enough for tuition, books, maybe even some breathing room while she studied. But more than the money, Jonathan's words echoed in her mind, sometimes our worst moments can become catalysts for our best decisions. As the last customers paid their bills and filtered out into the night, many stopped to compliment the staff and express their intention to return soon. Word was already spreading on social media. Several diners had posted about the evening's events, praising both Sarah's courage and Jonathan's unexpected transformation. The cleaning and closing routine felt different that night. Instead of the usual exhausted silence, the staff worked with an energy born of pride and possibility. They had witnessed something rare, a moment when standing up for dignity and respect had actually mattered, had actually changed something. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her babysitter. Maya's asleep, but she wanted me to tell you she's proud of her mom. I don't know what happened at work tonight, but she said you sounded different when you called, stronger. Reading the message, Sarah realized that her daughter had been listening more carefully than she'd known to her mother's struggles and frustrations. Tonight's events weren't just about her own dignity, they were about modeling for Maya that self-respect was worth fighting for, that standing up to bullies mattered regardless of their status or power. As she finally hung up her apron and gathered her things, Sarah found a handwritten note tucked into her locker. It was from Jonathan, apparently written while she was in the kitchen celebrating with her colleagues. Dear Sarah, I've spent years believing that my job was to maintain standards through criticism and judgment. You've taught me that true standards come from treating people with dignity and respect. The scholarship fund is just the beginning. I want to use my platform to celebrate the people who make dining experiences special, starting with you and your colleagues. Thank you for reminding me that the best review anyone can give is recognizing the humanity in those who serve us. With admiration and gratitude, Jonathan Whitmore. 3 days later, Jonathan Whitmore's review of Le Petit Jardin appeared both online and in the Sunday edition of the city's most prominent newspaper. But it wasn't like any review he had ever written before. The most important meal of my career, a lesson in dignity at Le Petit Jardin. I went to Le Petit Jardin last Saturday night expecting to write a standard review. Instead, I received an education in humanity that has fundamentally changed how I understand my role as a critic and as a person. The food was exceptional, every dish crafted with obvious skill and passion. The service was attentive and professional despite the restaurant being short-staffed. But the real story of the evening had nothing to do with cuisine and everything to do with courage. I behaved badly that night. Worse than badly, I was cruel, dismissive, and deliberately hurtful to people who were working hard to create a memorable experience. I used my position to belittle and intimidate, forgetting the basic truth that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Sarah Martinez, our server, did something I've rarely witnessed in 30 years of dining. She stood up for herself and her colleagues with grace, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. She reminded me that criticism should build up rather than tear down, that expertise should be about recognizing excellence rather than finding fault. This is my public apology to Sarah, to the entire staff at Le Petit Jardin, and to every service industry worker I've ever treated as less than the complete human being they are. You deserve better from critics, from customers, and from society as a whole. Le Petit Jardin earns my highest recommendation not just for its outstanding food and service, but for employing people of character who understand that dignity and respect are the most important ingredients in any meal. I'm also pleased to announce the Jonathan Whitmore Scholarship Fund for Service Industry Workers, established to help people like Sarah pursue their dreams while recognizing the valuable work they do in making our dining experiences special. Sarah Martinez will be our first recipient as she pursues her nursing degree. Sometimes the most important reviews aren't about the food, they're about remembering our humanity. Thank you, Sarah, for teaching this old critic that the best service comes from the heart, and the best response to excellence is gratitude, not judgment. 5 stars for the food. But more importantly, 5 stars for the reminder that treating people with dignity never goes out of style. The review went viral within hours. Food industry workers across the city shared it on social media, praising both Sarah's courage and Jonathan's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes publicly. Other critics began examining their own approaches, wondering if they too had lost sight of the humanity behind the hospitality they evaluated. Le Petit Jardin was booked solid for the next 3 months. Sarah's story inspired service workers throughout the city to stand up for their own dignity, while Jonathan's transformation sparked conversations about power, respect, and accountability in professional relationships. But perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone involved that our worst moments don't have to define us, they can transform us, if we have the courage to learn from them and the wisdom to choose grace over revenge. Sarah Martinez walked across the stage at City Community College, accepting her acceptance letter into the nursing program with a smile that could have powered the auditorium. In the audience, her daughter Maya cheered loudly, while her colleagues from Le Petit Jardin, who had all taken the afternoon off to attend, applauded with obvious pride. Jonathan Whitmore sat in the back row, clapping quietly but with genuine satisfaction. His scholarship fund had grown to support 12 service industry workers pursuing new careers, but Sarah remained special, the person who had changed not just her own trajectory, but his as well. His reviews had evolved dramatically over the 6 months since that pivotal Saturday night. While still maintaining high standards, they now focused on celebrating excellence, encouraging improvement, and recognizing the human effort behind every meal. Other critics had begun following his lead, creating a cultural shift in how the food industry approached evaluation and feedback. After the ceremony, Sarah approached Jonathan in the parking lot, her daughter shy but curious beside her. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for the scholarship, but for showing me that standing up for yourself can lead to something better than just winning an argument." Jonathan smiled, kneeling down to Maya's level. "Your mother taught me something very important," he told the 8-year-old. "She taught me that treating people with kindness and respect is more important than being right or powerful. That's a lesson I hope you'll remember too." Maya nodded solemnly, then surprised him by asking, "Are you going to come eat at Mommy's restaurant again?" "Actually," Jonathan said, standing and looking at Sarah, "I'm planning to bring a very special guest next week. The editor of our food section wants to meet the server who inspired our most read review of the year." As they parted ways, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational Saturday night. She was 3 months into her nursing program, Maya was thriving in school with new confidence inspired by her mother's courage, and Le Petit Jardin had become one of the city's most respected restaurants, not just for its food, but for its workplace culture. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won through conquest, but through the simple act of refusing to let others diminish your dignity. Sometimes standing up for yourself opens doors you never knew existed. And sometimes, the people who challenge us most become the catalysts for our greatest growth. The power to demand respect while showing grace, to fight for dignity while maintaining compassion, that's a lesson worth more than any meal, any review, or any scholarship. It's a reminder that at our best, we lift each other up, transforming moments of conflict into opportunities for connection and growth. In the end, the most memorable dining experiences aren't just about the food, they're about the moments when we remember our shared humanity and choose to treat each other with the dignity we all deserve.